went to a party yesterday, and it just occurred to me. I went outside and could hear how loud it was, how all the neighbors could hear it. And it was during the day, so it wasn't at night. But the tolerance of this culture, the tolerance, nobody complained. Nobody. And it just occurred to me at that moment, you know, that toleration is freedom. You know, because it's not just all about me, you. That's an old Dodge truck. Interesting. Looks like a 62. So we touched a little bit on how some of these countries imitate mostly the US. And I just used some of the examples that came to the top of my head. I'm sure there's a lot more, but I think it's an important subject because, you know, it's related to moving abroad, because we might end up going somewhere where, you know, maybe you didn't like certain things about where you were at, and then you go to somewhere else and then they start doing the same thing. Case in point, a lot of times the returning local citizens, and it could be any country really, returning citizens, they'll come to Ecuador and they'll think the best thing they can do for their country is to no problem. They'll think the best thing they can do for their country is push to get laws passed similar to what they're used to where they came from. For example, some people refer to the US as over-regulated. I think that's just a nice way of saying that it's a hellhole. I mean, my opinion is, if I was not going to call it a hellhole, I would call it a whitewashed wall. So, take your pick. Oh, and it has nothing to do with Trump or Obama, or people are so shallow, they, you know, it's got nothing to do with that. The US was a hellhole before Trump and before Obama, even before Bush. It doesn't really matter. Or, you know, and so you've got these returning locals that think that they're just bringing home the, I don't know, bringing home the bacon or something, who knows what, you know. You also see it not just in that segment, but you see it in the expat segment. You'll once in a while you'll see people get on these Gringo portals and forums, and they'll say things like, the government has to do something about this. We've got this problem here in Cuenca. It's always a kind of like, you know, like they just got down here and then now they own the place, so now they have a right to change the laws around, you know. The government must do something. And isn't this the very same crowd back in the over-regulated country, the whitewashed wall? Isn't this the problem that they have there? That there's all these groups that think that the government must do something. You know, and whenever the government must do something, it always does it at the expense of somebody else. But hey, as long as it's not at your expense, then I guess it's okay, huh? And so, I mean, I see this over and over, though. It's not superficial or inconsequential. This is a push. It's a big push. And it's something to consider, because I think that the move abroad landscape has changed. The way people move abroad has to change, just because of the trends that are in motion with these kinds of things that we're discussing. There's a lot to talk about it. It's sort of a wide subject, and it encompasses and covers a lot of areas, but you know, just to narrow it down, you know, when you look at Panama, they've got people in government there that think the thing to do is to do things like the US. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. You know, talk about exporting the Babylon. Exporting Babylon is exactly what it is. You're just exporting Babylon if you don't know what that is. That's the reason why it's happening, because you don't know what it is. But I think you can get what I'm saying, because you know, you're just bringing the same over-regulation that a lot of people are wanting to escape, because it makes life treacherous. It takes away your freedom. I think this is a really important aspect of freedom. You know, exporting in a nutshell, you know, people exporting their non-freedom to their country that maybe has a little bit more freedom at this time. Because things are always fluctuating, and sometimes they move very fast, like in Cuba or Venezuela. It just depends on the particular time, and it depends on who you are too. If you're a Cuban or a Venezuelan, you know, you're up a creek at the time of the revolutions, or even if you were back in the Leo Tolstoy days, the communist revolution of Russia. Look at how Russia has changed in 100 years, in 30 years actually. So yeah, so you've got this this thing. Here's an example. We went to a party yesterday, and it was in an Ecuadorian neighborhood. It wasn't a Gringolandia or Gringo neighborhood particularly. It was Ecuadorian. It was an Ecuadorian birthday party. It was for a child, so there was family. It was all family, lots of children, lots of family. No alcohol, a cake and candy and such. But it was a Latin party for a child, right? So of course it had the big loudspeaker, and it had the clown with the microphone, and everybody in the neighborhood could hear it, and the music was, you know, Latin music, and it was great. It was great. I'm not, you know, I'm not saying anything about it. I'm saying it was great. And it just occurred to me, I went outside and could hear how loud it was, how all the neighbors could hear it. And it was during the day, so it wasn't at night. But the tolerance of this culture, the tolerance, nobody complained. Nobody. And it just occurred to me at that moment, you know, that toleration is freedom. It's an aspect of freedom, tolerating your neighbor, you know, because it's not just all about me, you. Well, I spent $500,000 on this house. I have a right to peace and quiet, you know. Yeah, I went outside and said to somebody, you know, if this was in the States, somebody would have called the cops on you. And you know what's happening? People are complaining in the Gringo neighborhoods, and they now have noise ordinances, and they have signs that telling people to call 911 if somebody's playing loud music. Can you imagine that? Talk about exporting, you know. I mean, yeah, call 911 because your neighbor is, you know, is too loud. You know, I mean, talk about, this is where this was going. I'm just saying, I was in an Ecuadorian neighborhood. You didn't see that. But in the Gringo neighborhood, you've got this exporting going on. So, I guess what I'm saying is that we understand the depth of the issue. That in order to have freedom, there's a certain amount of toleration of your neighbor that has to exist. And that's what doesn't exist in the States. There's no toleration of your neighbor in the States. And here's another thing, guys. A lot of these people, obviously, from what I've just said and reported to you, real life examples of here in Cuenca, obviously, a lot of these people are moving to these retire places. And this is why I said earlier that the move abroad theme is changing. It has to change. Because these places are on the RAM circuit. Retire abroad, media and magazines, and they've become very well known and very populated. And they become very subject to the transplant issue and the exporting issue. That I've just discussed. And so moving abroad has to develop. And I think it is. It's just really slow and it's small. And I think that it can start with small groups of friends. They can say, look, we have similar values, we like each other, and you know, you've got some strengths, you can speak Spanish, we've got some strengths, we can do this, we can do that, we can do a lot more together. But I think that people can start maybe even just opening up the discussion, or at least thinking about it. You know, because for the time being, you know, we're in the Ecuadorian neighborhood and we didn't get bothered. But this is a birthday party. It's a Latin birthday party for a child, for goodness sakes. Nobody wants to be told they can't have music in the middle of the day. I know the States is much, much worse. That's the, you know, the thing that concerns you is that how bad, you know, will it get and how quickly? Because in the States, I know, I've got a lot of things I can say that are controversial. And to me, controversial just means people with different opinions that are intolerant and they get angry, or worse. That's all that is. I like to have put things out, open out on the table and just discuss them. In the States, it's much, much worse. I know people where their children, maybe an 8-year-old kid steps on an old lady's lawn and she calls the cops on them in the middle of the day. I'm not talking about a troublemaker kid in the neighborhood that's throwing rocks, doing drugs or stealing. I'm talking about just a good kid that goes to school and he's clean and he's just a kid. He walked on your lawn. But yeah, got the cops called on him. There's so many examples like that. I don't want to bore you guys. If you're in the States, you already know. So it occurs to me in closing that these RAM magazines, the damage they cause is not just in price bubbles and the financial displacement of the locals, but also the displacement of freedom itself. Yep. But yeah, exporting that system to the RAM magazine, top of the list abroad, that's the concern, guys. That's where moving abroad has got to morph. It just has to, for some of us. And we can do it together. I welcome your ideas. Thanks for watching the video and have a wonderful day.